A few years ago, my mum went on a solo road trip. She doesn't usually like to travel alone, but I was in college and she wanted to visit some family a few states over. The trip went well up until the last night on her drive back home. She had booked a room in a B&B that looked really nice online, but everything went off the rails when she actually arrived, which I witnessed since I was on the phone FaceTiming and being informed with texts and photos from her almost the entire night. When she pulled up to the house, it was totally dark. There were no lights on inside and it seemed almost deserted. When she called the B&B to say that she'd arrived, she was told to take a key from under the doormat and unlock the door herself, as the innkeeper had been called away in an emergency and she would be the only one there for the night. She was already a bit uncomfortable with the situation, but went inside anyway, since she had already paid the fee and didn't have anywhere else to stay. The interior was old-timey looking, with velvet drapes, thick dusty carpets, shelves full of photos and trinkets, and weirdest of all, many decorative plates with babies or children painted on them all over the walls. My mum locked the door behind her and went upstairs quite quickly since she was feeling scared. Upstairs was worse though, with the continued vintage furnishings and the unfortunate addition of about 15 ceramic dolls in each room, arranged on the beds and propped up on the tables and shelves. At this point, my mum was really freaked out, but kept trying to convince herself that there wasn't actually anything scary about the inn or the dolls or anything else there. So she picked a room and started trying to go to bed. She did find herself turning the dolls around in her room so they faced the wall, even though she's usually a stark disbeliever in anything paranormal. That's when everything got really strange. She started hearing sounds all over the house, very human-like sounds. It started with creaking, then footsteps and whispering. My mum was overtaken with fear in a way that she'd never experienced before. She found herself frozen in place, where she quite literally couldn't move, whilst hearing more and more activity. The sounds eventually escalated to screaming, crashing, and banging sounds from all over the house. After a few minutes, my mum managed to shake herself from the paralyzation and realized that she needed to get out as fast as she could. She was so terrified that she actually tried climbing out of the window on the second story, but the roof below was too steep and she had to climb back inside. Then, she took a fireplace poker, since she said she didn't know if the noise was from some robbers or something, gathered up her stuff, and ran into the hallway and down the stairs. She was quite shocked to see that everything was exactly as it was when she came in, except for one thing. A single one of the baby plates had fallen from the wall and shattered on the floor. There were no people in the house. The door wasn't bashed in. All the furniture was in the same dusty spots as before. She booked it for the door, threw it open, dropped the house key somewhere in the front yard, and drove away. She had never been more afraid in her entire life, and had never been less sure in her opinion that ghosts were fake. She drove around the town for a while, and ended up in a Motel 6, where she probably slept about 45 minutes, and then came home. Unfortunately for her though, that isn't where the story ends. She had been looking forward to arriving home so that she could finally be done with the whole frightening occurrence, maybe get some sleep, and watch some reality TV that had been recorded while she was gone. What she didn't account for was the ghostly hitchhiker that seemed to follow her back. That first night home, she fell asleep on the couch with the TV on. Around 2 a.m, the TV turned off on its own, and she woke up suddenly to hear footsteps running through the living room. She lives totally alone in a standalone house. Weird things continued to happen for about 2 to 3 months, including a constant problem with the TV turning on and off, changing volume, and changing the channel by itself. She would hear voices, screams, and footsteps throughout the house, and would often wake up to have items in the kitchen and living room moved around very weirdly with no explanation, the most notable of which was when the toaster was mysteriously moved to the top of the fridge one night. Fortunately, my mum really dedicated herself 100% to ignoring the ghost and trying to avoid feeding negative or scared energy into it, and after a few months, it went away. She felt like she knew for sure, though, that it was a ghost, and that it latched onto her that night at the inn. She certainly isn't much of a skeptic anymore. I worked in a gold mine just outside Fairbanks, Alaska. Our crew had about 8 to 10 people on it, spread out over the entire mill, which was a compound of 6 to 7 huge buildings in an area of about 3/4 of a square mile. It wasn't uncommon for you to not see another person for almost your entire shift, and we used radios to communicate. Most of us had the corded mic from our radio and clipped it right to our shirt beneath our ear, since we had to wear earplugs at all times and needed to be able to hear as best as we could. This made the radio traffic loud enough to hear in the super loud areas of the mill. One night, it was raining pretty good. I was walking outside down this road that had a 4-story structure on my right and 6 to 7-story tall huge tanks on my left. It was lit by the yellow industrial lights, so at night, the shadows always played tricks on your eyes, especially if you were tired. We would see shadow people all the time. You just became used to it. As I was walking, my radio started crackling. A really old, drawn-out gasp of someone struggling to take a deep breath came over the radio, and all of a sudden, the power went out. Right as the power went out, a voice came over the radio that sounded almost like an old lady's whisper mixed with Gollum from Lord of the Rings. She said, "They can't see us if we're not in the light." I froze where I was, and after about 10 seconds, I got on the radio and asked which one of my guys said that. Nobody knew what I was talking about. Then, all of a sudden, a loud laugh came over the radio, and the power came back on. That night was terrifying. Just to introduce myself, my name is Torin. To give some background, I believe the apartment I was living in was very haunted. My bedroom was downstairs and had a closet. Then that closet led to another door to the basement. The same level was equally terrifying. Some things to note that were strange about the place. In the laundry room, there were bullet holes in the wall. Quite often, I would hear bangs and knocks coming from that room, even when there was no laundry. Common things that would happen around me. Doors would open and close randomly. In the bathroom, the door would just open with no one there. Walking up and down the stairs, it would feel like nails or fire on your feet. I heard my name being called by voices I didn't recognize. I would constantly see different people. I gave these people nicknames. There was a doorman, a tall figure that would stand right behind my front bedroom door, who would stare at me and smile. There was an alien dude, a creepy short thing that looked like a messed up version of E.T., who would be in the corner of my room by my closet, who would move closer and closer to my bed every night with very creepy breathing. Every time something strange or scary happened, at the time I didn't know, but I heard my heartbeat. So naturally, my body just sensed when something was going on. Also, things got so bad that I had to tell people about this. The whole time I lived there, I was between 5 and 9 years old. So the day I told people about it, 2 things happened. The first is for the rest of the day, I saw faces anywhere it was dark. The second thing was my bed got shaken. To give some context for this, I had a bunk bed. I was so scared of things happening, I thought I would be safer to sleep on the top. So while on top of the bed, I heard my name being called from the closet. The bed was shaking so much, I got tossed out of my bed. I was terrified from that point on. Luckily, we moved out shortly after that. Another thing that happened is one night I saw Dorman. He would always close the door, but while I was watching him do this, I heard something on my bottom bunk. I then heard a dog panting. Then I heard another creak. I looked down, and there's 2 indents on the bed. One that looked like a man, and another, a dog. I didn't see the doorman after that. Another story is when I was playing some games in my room, sitting in front of my TV, at the other end of the closet. I always tried to be as far away as possible from the closet. Then the power went out. It was pitch black. Suddenly, I heard the closet door open. I felt hands all over my body. When the light came back on, my body was halfway through the door. Both the closet door and the basement door were open. I could do nothing but scream in panic. I ran upstairs, and then I had to go to school, but I was quiet for the rest of the day. Another story took place at Christmas. We had just finished opening presents, or we were going over to families, so I ran downstairs to put on my socks and shoes. I ran so fast that I ran straight into my dresser, and I think I knocked myself out. The next thing I know, I'm in the basement. My parents came to get me, confused about why I was in there. I didn't know why, but again, I was terrified. I have a brother who might share some of his stories, but the most notable that affected me were these. We didn't live in the same house, so he would come and visit and stay for a couple of days occasionally. So he slept downstairs on the bottom bunk while I slept at the top. Almost every time he was over, he would always end up walking upstairs. He sleepwalked, but he had never done it before, and never has since he has been in that place. It was like he was in a trance. One of these times I was brave enough to ask him where he was going, why he kept leaving. All he did was turn around and smile, but the way he did it was so unnatural, nothing like he's ever done. Then continued walking. He would have no recollection of this. Another story that happened. We were playing video games like we normally do, just talking about random stuff. Then, all of a sudden, he stopped talking. I was still looking at the screen, but he stopped moving in the game. So I turned to him, and he's leaned over. I get worried and ask him what's wrong. He then stands up, not talking, corners me, and chokeholds me to the wall. He's just smiling maniacally. Then, a few moments later, he lets me go. He then just stares at the ground, comes back to, and then he continued the conversation we were having as if we had never stopped. I told him what happened, and he had no idea why we were standing there instead of playing the game. Again, this had never happened before this apartment, or after. Truly strange. So this story took place in the bathroom. My dad was sick at the time. I wanted to take his pain away. So out loud in the bathroom, I exclaimed that I would do anything to take away his pain. Suddenly, the walls that were painted white turned yellow and then purple. I then blacked out. When I came to, it was the next day, and I was laying on the bathroom floor. The only other time I blacked out was when I fell asleep in my room like normal. I woke up in the kitchen, holding a steak knife. My sister had an imaginary friend that wasn't so imaginary. I could see her friend. I would see her sleeping in my sister's bed, telling my sister to do bad things, etc. Until finally, the friend was told to leave by our parents, and she was never seen again. There was also a creature-like thing I would see outside my window. He would keep tapping on my glass. The only way I can describe it is it was very tall and lanky, and it had red, glowing eyes. Also, I was sleeping in my room one night. I woke up to hearing something opening my door. Then I see this tall, creepy man walk in, come straight to my bed, and look over me. He then smiles creepily and walks away. The next day, I described what I had seen to my parents. They said it sounded like I saw the boogeyman. For some context on this situation, I live with 4 roommates, and several days ago, at around 2:30 in the morning, it sounded like someone was moving pots and pans around in our kitchen very loudly. At the time, I thought nothing of it, as we are still all college students, so someone was surely making a meal that late at night. I asked all of them in the morning, and no one was out of their rooms or was awake at that time. One other roommate heard this and had the same thought. After this, we searched the whole house and even checked in our attic to see if someone was living there. No one was up there, and nothing had occurred since, until I had a very strange occurrence earlier in the day. I'm still pretty creeped out, as this happened a little less than an hour ago. I was sitting at my desk just doing some work and had been there for a couple of hours. Not doing much, just in the flow of work and in my own little world. I have a journal with a pen resting next to it that has been stationary for hours. I notice the pen start to move slightly and move back to its original position and think nothing of it. But once I take my eyes off the pen and back to the monitor, it rolls to the middle of my desk and stops in the middle of my mouse pad. This may be a tiny thing that I chalked up to me doing something that caused it to move. I was looking for a song on my TV and was completely motionless when this occurred. I proceed to stare at this pen for a minute or two, and I say out loud, "Roll it back, please." I was hoping for something, but unfortunately, nothing occurred. I put the pen back in its original spot and started messing with it, seeing what caused it to move and if something minor could have caused this. I can confidently say that it took some energy to get this pen rolling from the side of my journal. This was not a gust of winds that caused this, and was not caused by any banging on the desk or any other type of motion in the room, as there was none. The other very concerning thing about this is that the pen continued to roll down the entirety of my mousepad until it hit my keyboard, unlike what it did when it first moved there, where it stopped in the middle of my desk. I've tried rolling this pen repeatedly for the past hour and a half, and cannot repeat it without starting the pen myself. So this is something that happened to me last Thursday. This is the first real paranormal experience that has happened to me. It's been about a week now, and I'm not certain I've fully processed it. The last few nights, I have even been having pretty intense dreams. Not really nightmares, I'm used to those, but vivid dreams that are just oppressive with anxiety. It's starting to get to the point where I can't really go to sleep. I have to work in the morning and should be asleep right now. Yet here I am, after 2 a.m, physically and mentally fatigued, but completely wide awake. My hope is that in writing this out, I can move past this mental block and get back to normal. About 5 years ago, my wife and I moved from the city out to a house more in the country. The house is a coal miner house that can be commonly found in this area of Pennsylvania. They're big, yet somehow always feel cramped. Generally not the best insulated and old, so most of the time they need a good bit of fixing up. We were happy enough though, because it meant moving away from the city. Plus, the rent was cheap, and our landlords were friends of my wife's family. So, all in all, a good move. Our landlords bought the place for their daughter, after the previous owner, an elderly blind lady who went to their church, passed away. Not in the house though. Her health dropped and she moved into a hospice for a month before passing away, quietly in her sleep. Our landlords bought it from her family for their daughter, but she had just gotten married and moved in with her husband, and they didn't want it, so it sat empty for the winter. So we moved in and things were good. The house itself was essentially set up like a duplex split vertically, but there was a door upstairs that connected both sides. The other side from us was empty and hadn't been updated since the elderly lady lived there. The power and water was shut off on that side, and since we had access to the whole place, we pretty much used it for storage. I say all of this because from day one, my wife had bad vibes from the vacant side. I was okay with this. By this point in our relationship, I was well familiar with her sensitivity to these things. At this time, I was open to the existence of the unexplainable. I have known many people who have had paranormal events happen. Even once worked with a guy who claimed he saw Bigfoot while hunting. I've had weird occurrences happen, and a strange event when I was a kid, but nothing I would concretely define as paranormal. Now, I'm very paranoid by nature, but life experience has taught me that the worst thing that can go bump in the night is another person. My wife brought up this bad vibe from time to time. It seemed to ebb in and out. She explained that it seemed centralized in the attic and was dark and predatory, but curious and seemingly wanting to be around. There were several times that I had looked the whole house over for her, just in case. Eventually, I completely locked the other side up in such a way that the only way to get to that side was to go in from the side we lived in and cross through the door that separated the two halves. The attic itself was just a little crawl space that had recently been updated with modern insulation. The only access was a small hatch on the vacant side ceiling, no stairs or ladder attached to it. So things went pretty well for the 5 years. Every now and then, there would be a weird creak or a small bang, but it's an old house, and also we had 2 dogs and a cat, so that was to be expected. Anytime a specifically strange creak would happen, which would sound like someone walking around, I would go over and check, but nothing. No boogeyman, no weirdo living in a secret passage, just a few old echoey walls and some extra boxes filled with Christmas decorations. So the event in question happened last week. My wife and I finally have been able to get a house of our own. We actually moved in just this previous weekend, so naturally, all last week we were packing things up and moving our things out from the vacant side so they'd be ready when we got the U-Haul. I've been working from home ever since the COVID pandemic started and was taking a lunch break. My office is upstairs, and I had walked downstairs and grabbed some lunch. My wife was at her work, as was one of our dogs. He's a service dog for her and mostly goes everywhere with her. So there I was, sitting down eating and watching TV, and out of nowhere, I hear a clear and distinct voice say, "Come closer." The voice came from directly overhead in the upstairs hallway. Not the hallway on the vacant side, the upstairs hallway on the side that we lived in. The voice was quiet. It sounded like someone trying to whisper, loud enough that they could be heard on the same floor, but not by anyone else. The voice seemed about my age or a little older, somewhere around mid-30s to early 40s. It didn't sound especially young or old, just a normal adult female voice. I immediately stopped everything I was doing and listened closer. The voice spoke again. "Come closer." It was the same forced whisper, and I absolutely was not imagining it. This time, I could tell it was distinctively female, and that it was in a way that the voice was coming from the end of the hallway that leads to the door that bisects the house and was projected to the other end where our stairs were. I could also tell that the voice seemed to be speaking to someone, but not me. I stood up and turned off the TV, kind of in a weird way of shock. Strangely enough, I was really taken off guard. Not just that I was hearing this, but that it was directed to me, and my mind was racing on who it could be and who it could be talking to. It then hit me that our dog, a little Jack Russell mix, wasn't with me, eyeing me up for scraps like he normally would be. Sure enough, I heard the voice a third time say, "Come closer." It only sounded like there was a hint of amusement, like the person was saying it smiling. Immediately, and I mean immediately, I heard my dog bark. He was at the top of the stairs, and it was a fast, panicked bark. I grabbed the handgun I keep in the drawer in the room I was in and bolted towards the stairs. I went moving into the kitchen and turned to face the stairs. Just as I did, I saw my Jack Russell scrambling past my feet, evidently running from something. I carefully climbed the stairs, moving slow now and listening as hard as I could. As I reached the top, I turned down the hallway and found nothing. Nothing at all. For the next 20 minutes, I searched the whole upstairs, office, bathroom, closets, everything. There was no one and nothing out of place. Next, I went to the door that led to the vacant side. I always kept a 5-gallon bucket and a dolly propped up against it. This was mainly to keep the animals from going to the vacant side. The door was old and swollen and didn't latch right and would pop open when it got hot or cold out. So while it's easy enough to move them out the way, it would be difficult to move the items back against the door if you were going from our side to the vacant side. And yet, there was the dolly and bucket right there where they were supposed to be, pressed right against the door. I went over on that side anyway and checked up and down. All the windows were locked, all the doors sealed, nothing out of place. The whole experience had me so frazzled and, to be honest, a bit panicked. This truly was not just an auditory hallucination. I genuinely heard someone talking, and not just me, but my dog heard it as well. I ended up texting my wife, and she called me when she had a minute. I just explained what happened, and she helped calm me down a bit. She of course reminded me of the feelings she had gotten, and I had to agree with her. This happened on Thursday, and we actually ended up moving on Friday, which was what we had previously planned on anyway. But the entire time that it was there, especially for the rest of my workday, I literally felt like someone was standing directly behind me, looking over my shoulder. You know the feeling I mean, when someone is behind you or looking at you, and you don't know it, but you can somehow feel it. So you look, but in this case, still just nothing. Anyway, we are moved into our new place now. We still have some odds and ends to bring over. We were moving things individually on Monday and Tuesday, but there's now this incredible feeling of anxiety and being watched that we are waiting for this Saturday when we can both go together and finish cleaning everything out. I think once all of our things are out of the house and we have officially closed that chapter, that I will feel completely better. But wow, I didn't realize that things like this could feel like this. I know it probably sounds silly, but I still can't shake how it made me feel. Whatever it is, if it actually even is anything, is definitely still at the old house and seemingly content to stay there or unable to move away. I think what has shaken me the most though was that it didn't and does not feel human. Like when you talk about a ghost or something like that, you're talking about a human spirit or an echo of human energy or something like that. But this didn't feel like anything I've experienced. Not human, not animal, nothing normal. Especially that day when I couldn't shake that something was right behind me. It was just this weight of anxiety, and as dumb as it sounds, like something that is both extremely hungry, but too curious with me to do anything about it, yet. It's always interesting to me how strange and unusual my home state of Washington really is. Think about it. It's had dozens of serial killers pass through, come from, or live there. We have high rates of Sasquatch sightings, countless UFO reports over the Cascade Mountains, and more eerie little towns than a Stephen King novel. Between June of 2010 and July of 2011, I attended the Cascades Job Corps program in Sedro-Woolley, a rather quaint, albeit weird, mountain town which bled into neighbouring Burlington and Mount Vernon. I highly recommend that if you're in that part of northwest Washington, you pay a visit. The area is absolutely beautiful. Plus, if you're feeling the need to give yourself the creeps, put on the theme to Twin Peaks on your phone as you drive around. Trust me, you'll love it. Cascades Job Corps was a beautiful campus, somewhat isolated from the main body of Sedro-Woolley, with only one road to get in and out. The overall area has a sense of being an island, surrounded by dense woodlands. As you enter, you see to your left, after a short narrow drive, an abandoned 3-story building covered in creepy vines and other parasitic plants common to the area. To the right, you see the lush green yards dotted with massive trees of varied species, and behind them you see the first of 4 dorms. By this time, I feel I must make it known that the property, as far as I was able to determine, had only been a campus for the Job Corps program for less than 20 years at that point. According to the information I gleaned from back when I was a student, the campus had been built on an asylum for the mentally disturbed. The oldest buildings still standing when I was in attendance were originally where the patients were kept, which was made somewhat obvious when you consider the common areas were built with thick observation windows to look in, and all the windows on site were heavily reinforced. Given that this campus had once been a lunatic asylum, naturally many stories and legends cropped up, often being told to the new input groups of fresh students by people who had been there a while. Of those stories, the 2 most common that were told related to a little girl wearing a red dress said to haunt the halls of 2 of the dorms, and the other one of an angry Native American spirit that stalks the property at night. Additionally, you have stories of students hosting seances, using Ouija boards and summoning nefarious spirits, and all of the other common spooky events that one would expect from an old asylum. What I can say with certainty is that there was something about that campus that was supernatural. Myself being a cultist, I've learned over the years that certain places house a wide variety of very palpable energy, an energy that has a habit of attracting spirits, elemental entities, and negative forces. Why this is, especially for that campus, I can only speculate. My own theory is that because the campus houses several hundred students, ranging in ages from 16 to 24, many of which come from rather turbulent backgrounds too long to list here, whose own energies and psychological traumas imprint on the land. This is only amplified when you also consider that many years prior to the school, the area had been home to untold amounts of people suffering from insanity, and likely had been subjugated to a cornucopia of terrible procedures indicative to the time. Regardless, my year spent on campus had seen me encounter some unusual instances of the paranormal, the first of which happened 1 month after entering the program. I was sitting with my then girlfriend and our mutual friend on a bench, which was located outside an old church which sat behind my dorm and was connected to the cafeteria and one of the storage areas. As we were talking, we heard come from the rear of the church, which was surrounded by unkempt hedges and bushes, a very loud, low growl. Now, for the record, all of us were worried a wild animal had wandered onto campus. It had happened before, and signs all over warned students about the possibility of bears, cougars, wild dogs, coyotes, and even porcupines, and it stood to reason that in that moment we were about to come face to face with a predatory animal. As we jumped up, we slowly began to back away, my girlfriend and friend behind me, pulling at me, though I kept trying to tell them not to run, but move slow in case it was an animal. I was just about to tell them both to remain calm when I suddenly felt a hard, forceful push on my chest, which staggered me back a few feet and almost knocked all three of us to the ground. Naturally, I was stunned. Nothing was in front of us, just open air, and yet I felt as if two large hands had pressed against my chest and pushed me back with full force. And as I stood my ground, trying to figure out what the hell had happened, I had been pulled away and forced to run with my friends. Later that night, I would find on my chest, where I was pushed, two large red marks that looked and felt like sunburns. The second incident that happened to me was several months and 2 girlfriends later, around Christmas time. Normally, the campus was nearly vacated, since most of the students go home for the holiday break. Sadly, my only family was too far to justify the trip, so I opted to stay. Needless to say, I was the only person in my dorm for that break, which was great. I basically had full reign over the common area, could watch anything on TV, get first pick of the good snacks. It was great. Plus, the additional privacy was always a bonus. Halfway through break, I decided after lunch to take a hot shower and made my way into the stalls. I kicked on the water, let it run so it could get hot, and hopped in. As I was standing under the hot water, I could feel a cold breeze on my feet, which was unusual since there were no windows in the showers, and the whole dorm was heated consistently throughout. However, in that instance, I didn't think much of it. The very clear and loud sound of a child's giggle, on the other hand, I did think much of. So here I was, standing naked and covered in soap, alone in a dormitory, and I could hear what sounded like a small child giggle right behind the shower curtain behind me, which prompted me to spin on my heel, throw up the curtain, and find nothing there, save for a very cold blast of air. And naturally, when you have something so random and creepy happen, the best thing I felt to do was rinse off, put on my robe, and book it down to my room and lock the door. Now, had this happened when other people were on site, I would have thought it was a prank, which was very, very common. Here's the problem. In my dorm, I was alone, save for the RA, who was downstairs, who also was a no-nonsense dude. I thought maybe it came from downstairs, since the vents did conduct, but again, no one was there. I even later went back with a stepladder to look into the vent to see if someone had put some kind of speaker or something in there to mess with whoever stayed behind over break. Nothing. Not a damn thing. I'm a 19-year-old female and live in a small town in South Carolina. I've lived here my whole life, in the same house. It was built in 1971. My father bought it with his ex-wife, and my mum, his current wife, moved in 2001. I was born in 2002. I'll start at the beginning. For as long as I've been alive, there have been footsteps in the attic. I always tried to rationalize it, just thinking that this is an old house, it's bound to make noise. But a couple of months ago, I heard bells jingling in the attic, like our Christmas decorations. It was above the bathroom, and the footsteps are usually above my room, which is right next door. I told my dad about it, and he went to check for animals. He didn't find any. Couldn't even find a place where they could have gotten in. He told me I was hearing things and probably needed to go to bed, so I did. Then I started hearing what I can only describe as footsteps coming from inside the walls. My mum heard it too, and so did our cats. At one point, it was behind our coffee maker, and we were both standing there, scared that it was a mouse or something. Our cat, Katniss, was desperately trying to find it, but couldn't. My mum told my dad this time. An exterminator came out, but couldn't find anything. The noise continued. Then I heard noises coming from the faucet in the bathtub. It sounded like someone was trying to force the faucet out of its place. I told my dad again, thinking there was a problem with the pipes. He found nothing. The footsteps and wall noises are continuous, but seem to get louder at night. I don't know if it's just because the house is quiet at night, so it sounds louder, or what. I should mention that our attic is very short and hot. It's not possible for a grown person to stand upright. So no, we don't have someone living up there. And like I said, my dad checked and found nothing. Then it started messing with our dogs. We have 3 dogs. In order of age, we have Amber, Bouncy, and Zoe. We previously had Lilbit, who was older than all of them, but I'll get into what happened to her later. Whatever it is, loves to annoy Zoe. She's the most skittish. She's terrified of our cats and will literally move off the couch if one of the cats gets near her. They've never attacked her. She's just a scaredy cat. Zoe will often wake up and snap at something on her back, specifically when she's laying on the big dog bed we have in the living room. She'll snap at it, lay back down, snap at it again, and decide it's not worth it, and gets up and moves. This doesn't happen to either of our other dogs, or our cats when they lay there. Only Zoe. There's nothing that could be touching her, and it's not fleas or anything, because she only does it when she's in that bed. The thing scared the hell out of our oldest dog, Amber, twice. Amber and Zoe are the most needy, terrified of loud noises like thunder and fireworks, and Amber trails after my mum 24/7. I never saw this, but apparently something scared Amber to the point where she tried to sit behind my mum on the couch, and she's a big dog, a golden retriever mix. She only does this with thunder and fireworks. None of the other dogs did this, just her, and she did it twice. No knocking on the door that she was laying in front of, which even if there was, she wouldn't be scared. She'd be barking her head off. The first experience that I remember was actually with a friend. I think I was in middle school, so this would be around 4 to 7 years ago. So I was friends with this girl, Kaylee. She lived down the street and would often come over to my house after school, and would sometimes stay for dinner before walking back home. That day was one of them. We had been in my bedroom that I shared with my older sister, Tori. Not sure where she was, but she wasn't in the room. My grandparents had this bench filled with toys that they needed to get rid of, because we were older and no longer used it, so we were allowed to pick some stuff out, and brought those things along with the bench home. One of the things I picked out was a Scooby-Doo stuffed animal. Apparently, it was called Fright Night Scooby stuffed animal. A flashlight was attached to his hand, and whenever you turned it on, there would be a ghost shadow on the light, and he would say something like, "Cover my eyes, too scary," in his iconic Scooby voice. I can't remember all the phrases he said, but there was only a set number of them. I had it turned off with no batteries, because it was purely just decoration. It had been sitting on the floor in front of my sister's bed, which is on the other side of the room from the door. Me and Kaylee were called for dinner, so I let her walk out of the room first before turning off the lights. And this thing goes, "Turn back on the lights, too scary," at the exact same time. Me and Kaylee ran out of the room. I don't even shut the door, and we're screaming about how it just talked. My parents don't believe me, of course, so we ate. Kaylee went home, and I ripped the wires out of that thing and threw it away. Before anyone asks, no, my grandparents' house is not haunted. I went over there pretty much every weekend and never experienced anything, so nothing was attached to the bench or the stuffed animal. Also, none of the toys my sister brought back ever did anything, just my Scooby-Doo toy. My sister moved out when I was 11. I'm 19 now, so I have our room to myself. It's weirdly shaped. Basically, it's a box, but they didn't finish one wall, so there's a little bump out area. For the longest, my bed was in that little nook. We had bunk beds that were in that nook. Then we had custom beds by my dad that were like lofted beds, and mine was in that corner. Now I have a proper bed that's too big for it, so now I have a desk in there with all my makeup. The bedroom door is next to the wall that the desk is on, so the door is across from my desk, through my closet. I'm explaining this horribly. My point is, I can't see my bedroom door from my desk, even if I was facing the center of my room. So I was sitting there, doing my makeup, when I see this black figure out of the corner of my eye. I immediately jump, thinking that my mum has snuck into my room without me noticing, but my door is squeaky as hell. I always hear it. So I turn around, lean around the corner, and the door is closed. No one is in my room. I'm looking around like, okay, what the hell did I just see? As I'm looking around, I see a black hand coming from my wall on the floor directly in front of the door. I had a piece of paper on the floor, so I figured that it just blew up and I just saw the shadow. So I go back to doing my makeup. I take some pictures, take it off, and sit back down on my bed, which is across from my desk in the corner of my room. Then I notice the paper is too far away from where I saw the hand. It's possible that the paper moved in the time I was at my desk, but that doesn't explain what I saw standing in the middle of my room. So I have a weird sleeping schedule right now. I'm unemployed, not going to school. I graduated in 2020. I woke up yesterday around maybe like 2 a.m. Anyway, so my dad left for work at 4 a.m. like always, and my mum went to bed around 3 a.m. So I have the whole house to myself. I got up and heated up some leftovers. I got something out of one of the cabinets, but I left it open because I knew I had to put the thing back, so what's the point in closing it? Mind you, our house is like 50 years old. Everything squeaks, even the cabinets. So I'm standing at the microwave. Ironically, it's right next to the coffee machine, and I turn around to put it back, and the cabinet is shut. Now, I know I have a bad memory, but I wouldn't have shut it. I don't shut cabinets unless they're low to the ground, where my cats can get in there. So how did this close? I should have heard it. It's a squeaky door. I literally have to open it a certain way when my mum is asleep, because I don't want to be too loud. So I just ignore it and go to my room. While I'm eating, my mum screams for me and sounds absolutely terrified. I thought she got mad at me because I accidentally woke her, so I just yelled, "What?" Pause real quick, because something just happened while I was writing this. I heard noises and my mum yelling, so I just left my room. And my mum said something in the bathroom scared our younger cat, Ivy, and she came running out of the bathroom, so that's great. I hate that bathroom. Stuff always happens in there. Anyway, back to this morning. She yells for me, and I just yell back, "What?" She doesn't respond, and I'm like, oh great, she's pissed. So I open my door, and I just see my mum sitting up in her bed, sobbing, and I'm like, what the hell? She says she heard a female voice, and it sounded like it was at the foot of her bed. So I'm like, great, someone broke into our house. So I go into her room and shut the door, leaving it a crack open. I grab her phone, and I ask her if we should call the police, but she says no. So I decide to check the house. I knew I had let the dogs out earlier, but was certain I locked the door after letting them back in. I turned on the flashlight on her phone and walked around, checking the front door and the back door, and they were both locked. I didn't bother checking the windows because our house is pretty impossible to break into, so I knew no one was in our house. She's still sobbing when I get back to her room. She said that it was feminine, but didn't sound like words, just mumbling, 2 syllables. All of my family members have 2-syllable word names, so it might have been a name. I asked her about sleep paralysis, and she said that she could move, but the voice sounded so clear. I told her about the cabinet because I remembered it, and it happened literally less than an hour before she woke up, and she didn't even say anything about it. She didn't go back to bed until my dad got home around 2 p.m. Bounce and Zoe were laying on the floor in front of her bed and didn't react to anything. Amber was laying next to my mum and was literally trying to sleep while I was in there talking to my mum. Katniss and Ivy were laying on the couch in the living room, and none of them reacted. I don't know if she saw anything. There may have been something there, but my mum is pretty blind without her glasses. She has bifocals, and it was also dark. But this is really starting to freak me out. My cats will just sit and stare at a corner of the living room that just so happens to connect to my mum's room. I thought for the longest time that it was the old man next door. The shadow person that I saw didn't feel feminine, but it also didn't feel threatening. I've woken up with bruises in random spots, and while I do move around a lot in my sleep, my mum would hear it if I hit a wall. I have no clue what to do. This, along with a lot of stuff that happened with Kaylee in the forest that surrounds our neighborhood, is really getting to me. I don't even wholly believe in this, but what else could it be? How do you imagine a sound? When I told my parents about the shadow person, they straight up laughed at me, so I can't even imagine what my dad will say to my mum. I saw her sobbing. She looked so scared. She called me because she thought someone might be in our house. Like, that's how sure she is that she heard it. I'm honestly so sick of this house. I just want to leave it and this town. Some people have suggested demons. I read a story on here about this guy whose friend's house was haunted by a demon who hated him, and the thing was attached to all the negativity, and I feel like that might be what's happening here, or at least in my house. I have some updates. The night I posted, while I was getting ready for bed, I heard a male voice yelling my name from the backyard while I was in the bathroom. I just ignored it, didn't even bother to check if someone was really there. This was around 9 p.m, and at 11:30 p.m, I smelled my great-grandma's perfume in my bathroom 3 times while I was in there. I have 3 of her brooches that she left me after she died, and I can't wear them because they smell like her. She has a distinctive smell like nothing in our house, except for her things that smell like it, much less our bathroom. We do have an air freshener in there that's on a timer, but the scent in it was rose, and it's wildly different from how Nanny smells. I left the bathroom crying because it felt so real, and it was like she was in the room with me. And the weird thing is that after she died, I kept thinking about what if she's haunting us. She died like 3 years ago, and I had no reason to think that, but I couldn't get it out of my head. On October 11th, I smelled it again, and I kind of yelled at her. I was saying, of all the rooms in the house to haunt, why would you pick the bathroom, and how we weren't very close, so why are you haunting me instead of my mum? And I apologized immediately after because I felt like I was a bit rude. I haven't smelt it since, so I'm hoping that's over. On October 14th at 7 a.m, I was playing in the kitchen with my cat, Ivy, while sitting on the floor in front of the dining room table. We have an umbrella open in the front of the litter box to prevent our dogs from going in there, and the umbrella moved. I don't know what made it move, but it wasn't my cat's. On October 15th, at 6:40 a.m, I was leaning up against the counter in the kitchen so that Katniss could rub up against my back. She had turned around and was walking towards me, and she jerked her head around like someone grabbed her tail and jumped down and ran under the dining room table. I've been having a hard time sleeping ever since my mum heard the voice. I keep randomly waking up and falling asleep. This has happened several days in a row. I'm a heavy sleeper. I've slept through a hurricane, and the only thing that woke me up was the power going out because of how hot my room got. I have no idea what's causing me to wake up. I'm not under any stress, and I'm usually exhausted by the time I go to bed. My house is a one-story brick house that's on a huge hill. Our driveway isn't level, and the emergency brake has to be on all the time in my mum's car. The back of the house, aka my room, the bathroom, the office, and part of my parents' room is around 3 stories high. My parents' room is at a corner of the house, so one window is very low to the front yard, while the other one is really high. This is why I said it's really hard to break into my house. Not only that, but because my mum doesn't work, she's home 24/7. We also have a streetlight on the corner of our yard, near their room. I feel very safe from outside threats. One night, me and my sister were watching a VHS movie in my parents' room. They have a giant box TV in there, so we often watch movies. I was sitting on my mum's side of the bed, near the tall window, while Laurie was sitting on the other side, near the low window. I want to emphasize how tall this window is. I heard a metal on metal noise. That's one of the sounds that I can't stand, so I turned to look for the source, and I noticed that the screen in the tall window had been cut. A perfect horizontal cut was now in it. I screamed, and we ran out of there. My parents went to check outside and found nothing. No footprints in the dirt, no ladders had been moved, no weird cars on the street, absolutely nothing. I found out recently that they never replaced the screen because Katniss had been sitting on the windowsill, and I went to pet her and noticed it. I flipped out on my mum, and she said it was pointless to fix it. Weird little noises always happen in the bathroom. We used to have this muted pink-colored trash can in there before we remodeled. Didn't matter what time you took a shower, around 15 minutes in, you would hear something tapping on it. It was a very hollow noise. I don't know how to describe it, but I knew it was the trash can. I tried to rationalize it, thinking that maybe the heat caused the plastic to warp, making the noise. But it even happened to my dad, who takes pretty cold showers. It happened to my friends too when they stayed the night. I always had to warn them about it. Anyways, this is the one experience that my sister can remember. So she had been taking a shower, and we all heard this loud-ass noise. My mum goes and checks on her, and Tori literally fell into the wall, like the wall was caved in. We just assumed she had slipped and moved on, but later that night, she told me something pushed her. The hole isn't there anymore. It had been for years, but it was fixed when we remodeled. There was a plastic bag literally duct taped to it to prevent the wires in the wall from getting wet. The wall she fell into was connected to the office wall. I don't know if the thing knew that and wanted to mess with the power, or maybe even electrocute Tori, but it was creepy. I would like you all to remember that it's not possible for my family to move. The last thing that often happens in the bathroom were the shadows. So the bathtub is right behind the door, so when you open the door, it's right up against the shower curtain, but there's like a small wall directly behind the door, so it goes a bit of wall, and then the rest is the curtain for the shower, and then you reach the other wall, if that makes sense. So when you're in the shower, you're facing with your back to the door essentially. When someone walks into the bathroom while you're in the shower, you can see the shadow of the door opening, someone walking in, and then the door closing. But the problem is that sometimes when I'm taking a shower, I can see the shadow of the door opening and something walking in. I peek from behind the curtain, but the door is always shut and nothing is there. I would say it's my imagination, but I've heard my mum call for me, asking why I'm in the bathroom. So I know this stuff happens to other people.